fact of the matter is that we got involved in this process because of two major reasons. One is that there's a huge preponderance of informal labor in the economy, and everybody knows that. It's nothing new. 93% upwards perhaps are in the informal sector. The other thing that worries most of us is that our industrial sector is by and large pretty low tech. It should have been much higher. Given so many years of independence and all the talk about planning and so forth, it has not really measured up in that sense. So these are the two things that really, got us going as inspirational nodes. Well, in many ways, this is the kernel of our argument. Many things are the same as in the Industrial Disputes Act, lots of similarities, overlaps, etc., etc. But as you know, a good chef is known by the garnish he uses, and the garnish we are using is reconsideration of thresholds. Threshold number one is size of the unit. As you know, in the Industrial Disputes Act, there's a lot being said about those workers who are in units where there are 100 and more employees. Or the other thing, which is I think much more egregious, and that is this: those who have worked for 1 year, which is calculated in terms of 240 days, they have certain rights and privileges. Other people can take a walk in the park. It doesn't matter at all. So these are the two things that I think bother us the most. But on the other hand, see how both sides lose on account of this. The entrepreneurs say that we don't want to scale up our organizations, because if we scale up our organizations, we have to abide by certain rules and regulations, which we could do well without. Therefore, what they try and do all the time is somehow keep their units small. And by keeping them small, or at least below 100, they feel that they have solved the problem. And secondly, they keep flipping workers around. So before 240 days are up, there's somebody knocking on the door and saying, well, time to pack up and leave. And these are the two thresholds, I think, which do the most damage to the understanding of labor and enterprise, and indeed to the economy as a whole. So we believe that if all of this were taken, let's get rid of all thresholds. It is true that entrepreneurs in India haven't shown much skill or dexterity in upskilling their enterprises. They haven't done that. But at the same time, if this excuse lingers, then what happens is you have a proliferation of not just informal labor, but a huge number of small units, which, as you know, in the MSME recent census says that the average size is 4.5 or something, of a unit. And with that kind of size, what do you think you can do? Except for making papad or spices or embroidery, jewelry, or embroidery glasswork and things of that sort, which actually don't lead you anywhere. In fact, when people talk about export promotion and how we should learn from South Korea, what they forget conveniently, especially those who say that we don't have the right to hire and fire, what they forget is how South Korea really sat down and buckled under the whole thing and said, we are going to work in terms of producing high technology goods items. We are going to be leaders in exports of high technology good items, and that began to happen from the mid-1980s onwards. So out went the making t-shirts and socks and shoes, and in came other kinds of enterprise and expertise, which are very, very important. So this idea of small being beautiful, keep it small stupid, is not a good idea in our view. What should be allowed is things should be allowed to grow. And this growth should be exponential, endogenous, and from within, and not from without. You just don't abolish contract labor. What you do is when you hire contract labor, make sure you're hiring from a company whose core competence is exactly in that job. For example, if you're hiring somebody for bricklaying or hiring somebody for electrical fittings or whatever, you don't go out on the streets and pick up somebody sitting on his haunches in the market and say, come and do this work for me. There should be a company whose job is this. So while they are working in your company as contract laborers, they are on somebody else's muster. And being on somebody else's muster, they have all the rights and privileges as any other worker on the muster. So while they're contract laborers here, they're on the muster somewhere else. And it is this duple phenomenon that we would like to emphasize, that a contract labor is not abolished in that old-fashioned way, but it is regulated so that this contract labor is just a contract labor part-time in one way. But if you look at the whole picture, it's not this person is a contract laborer at all. This person actually belongs to some other outfit, where this person is the master and has all the rights and privileges as anybody else does. This is a point that I learned in our discussions, that if you want to create a good atmosphere in the unit, I think management must take the lead. They must actually demonstrate goodwill and good faith. It is also imperative that workers should be represented on the board of the management. There should be workers' representation in the board of the management so that on a day-to-day basis things can be sorted out. Even so, the concept, the problem of disputes still lingers on, and I can't postpone it for much longer. There will be problems in units. There will be conflicts, no matter how hard you try, simply because there are different positions out there. And there will be position advantages, position disadvantages. There will be reasons for people to pull one way or the other. But what we believe can be done in spite of all of this is if we all think that we have a common stake in the enterprise and in the unit. So what we suggest here is, and on this there is very little consensus, by the way, though we're all friends and we sit together, there's not much consensus here. That is this, that there should be one workers' council in every enterprise. One workers' council that represents the interests of the workers and takes those interests up to the management. This council, the office bearers should be elected universally by secret ballot. I think this solves a whole lot of problems. The second thing is that there are far too many bodies out there in terms of dispute resolution. Just look at the IDA. There's so many of them. There's a grievance commission, there's a workers work committee, there's a labor tribunal, there's a labor court, there's a national tribunal, conciliation board, all kinds of things over there, clamorings for space, edging each other out. Why should this be the case? Why don't we look for economy and not sacrifice the good in all of this? I think the best way of doing that is to A, have a workers' council, B, the second level, a conciliation board, whose chairman will be an outsider, and that is allowed for over here, but in a different guise. And the third should be a labor tribunal. Nothing new. You might say what we've done is we cut out a few stages, we've chopped out a few things, we made the tree look a little bare. Nothing new, you might say, but there's a whole lot new that's there. And what is new is this, that the time period at each level is fixed and cannot be tampered with. In this IDA Act, every now and then they say the time period is 7 days, 1 month, 2 months, but nevertheless, notwithstanding what has been said, we can make allowances and things can be changed. That is not allowed. That spoils everything. I think that even in industries which are seasonal in nature, you can make a stand and say that workers who are going to be there for a period of time, unless they've been hired as contract laborers from some other firm where they're on the muster, they should be there for at least 180 days. Anything more than that is a year, and they deserve all the privileges on account of that. So you have food industries, and the construction is different. Construction is time bound, so we just keep that aside for the time being. But even when we come to seasonality, I'd like to show you a little clip to just make the point that what we take as seasonal in terms of a popular understanding may not really be seasonal and could be a non-seasonal enterprise altogether. I'm thinking particularly in terms of the garment industry.
I think today it's very easy for any garment manufacturer to have a 12-month business, and definitely not seasonal. Most of us have focused more on the northern hemisphere and worried about their seasons, etc., and not focused on the southern hemisphere, which would be exactly the opposite, and would make sure that Indian product then is available to the entire world, and you take advantage of the opposite seasonality.
Remember people who started by making swimsuits and ended up by making snorkel outfits and also in fact jetties to dive out of. So if you want to do something really worthwhile, think big and don't feel that because it's garments you are allowed to be seasonal. In fact, if you're a good entrepreneur, you will say, I don't believe in that. Thank you very much.
Primary deliverable that you want from labor reform is to simply make it easier for industry to fire workers. Then you're going to end up with all kinds of problems. So we have tried to avoid that approach, while of course creating a framework which does make it easier for workers, for enterprises to to have flexible labor policy. So there is a nod in that direction, but we've tried to embed, not always completely successfully, and this is a work in progress. We've tried to embed the discussion of labor reform within the demand for a new social contract, for a sense in which you cannot build a modern market economy without a greater sense of equity at the workplace.
I think the basic issue is a huge asymmetry between workers and owners or managers. And one of the important parts which the Industrial Disputes Act tries is to correct this. And our effort has been to see how do you reduce this asymmetry. And nowhere is this asymmetry bigger than the case of informal workers who don't even have the protection of unions in most cases. And therefore, the thrust of the argument has to be to see how do you bring in that 90% plus of workers who are in the informal sector and give them the ability and the power to be able to live as good citizens.
In a Japanese or Korean manufacturing establishment, you were guaranteed a job, but you're not guaranteed the kind of job that you did. So if business was shrinking or things were changing, you only got a guarantee if you agreed to work wherever the employer put you. Now, I think we have another sort of limitation there in terms of the ability of workers to, or the ability of employers to redeploy workers wherever they see fit.
I think this has to be seen in the context of making India also competitive in the world market and increasing employment overall in manufacturing. And so I do believe that it would help to take a somewhat more holistic look at the labor laws, that ultimately we have to be successful as a manufacturing country.